I chose a pararescueman because a lot of the thrillers have your Navy SEAL, have your Green Beret, your Delta Force, and I wanted someone that could have some like outdoorsman tracker skills, but still have that kind of special forces skill. And the pararescuemen, I learned that they have the longest training. It's 2 years. They're essentially a combat medic. I've seen some memes that says pararescuemen, it's who Navy SEALs call when they need help behind enemy lines.
Hello, Robert. Thank you so much for being here today on this episode. We have the Cartel Hunter here. I have your book with me. Thank you for providing that.
Glad to be here, Mark. I'm excited to talk about Cartel Hunter.
So we're going to get right into the pitch. Just pitch me this book.
Well, Cartel Hunter is I would call it a vigilante justice thriller. It's about an everyday Joe kind of person who's an avid outdoorsman, but he gains his skills through his time in the military as an Air Force pararescueman, and he gets a black belt in Krav Maga. He's actually just an everyday kind of guy that I thought more people could relate to, but he has skills to attack and bring a cartel to justice that's terrorizing the mountain town in northern Arizona where he grew up.
Awesome. And where did this book idea come from?
Well, this idea, I'm based in Arizona. I live in Phoenix, the Sonoran Desert. A couple hours north, there's a lot of national forest. And I was visiting the national forest, specifically it's near Payson, Arizona, and it's called the Mogollon Rim. And when you go to the Mogollon Rim, it's a 2,000-foot escarpment above the largest stand of Ponderosa Pine National Forest in the United States. So when I was looking over that, standing on the edge one day, I was like, somebody could really hide in here, and if they didn't want to be found, it would be really hard to find them. People do get lost there, and it takes weeks sometimes to find them. So wow. I'm like, well, what if someone didn't want to be found? Like a cartel, and that was kind of what planted the seed. And so I just started working through the outline, and the other thing, one of the reasons I chose a pararescueman, because a lot of the thrillers have your Navy SEAL, have your Green Beret, your Delta Force, and I wanted someone that could have some like outdoorsman tracker skills, but still have that kind of special forces skill. And the pararescuemen, I learned that they have the longest training. It's 2 years. They're essentially kind of a combat medic. I've seen some memes that says, pararescuemen, it's who Navy SEALs call when they need help behind enemy lines. So that's kind of, who they are. They're just an amazing group of guys that kind of, have so much respect for what they do, and then also made the perfect character for Jason Mulder.
Yeah, it was a very cool take on that, and I appreciate that you did that, because it was fun in the opening too when you had him doing that rescue and that action scene that the book opened with. It was really interesting to see him as a pararescueman doing his thing, as opposed to that Navy SEAL approach. So I really appreciated that. Where did the plot idea come from? Like having him in that vigilante kind of role. Where did that come from?
Well, I had to kind of bridge the gap from him being a pararescueman, to actually helping, a family member out. And I didn't want to make it a pure military thriller, and I knew that he would have to go home to help his brother out. That was the inciting incident in the story that brings Jason out of active duty in the Air Force and to become a vigilante when the cartel chose his brother as a victim, and law enforcement wasn't doing their job. So he came home, and so it was partially to really just bridge that gap from the skills that made him believable as a hero and the protagonist that could do what I have him doing, and but still doing it in the forests of Arizona instead of maybe a battlefield somewhere in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. And what was the timeline for all this to come together for you, from the original idea, seeing the forest, to him as a character and actually putting the words down on the paper?
It took several years. I had the idea for a long time, and I kept putting it off. I had written one series before in a totally different genre, and this was the one I always kind of wanted to write. And actually, it was book two that was actually the one that led me to start the series. But I knew I needed to establish Jason Mulder as the pararescueman and as the protector of the family and all of that to make book 2 make sense. So that was how it all started, but I end up thinking Cartel Hunter turned out to be one of the better books of the entire series. But book 2 was really the inspiration that I kept thinking about. I couldn't get it out of my head. I'm like, I have to write this, but I knew it couldn't be the first book. I had to establish the character, and the second book is actually called Reverse Pursuit. Where it's kind of almost like a modern day fugitive in the forests of Arizona. So that was kind of where the idea came from. But Cartel Hunter leads perfectly into that. So if you read that, the Reverse Pursuit will make a lot more sense.
So did the idea for book 2 come first, and then you decided to write book 1 to set the...
It did.
Okay.
Yeah. It was book 2, and I just knew, I just to give a little quick overview of that, he's in the DEA, and he's framed, for taking drugs that he never actually took, convicted, and decides he's not going to go to jail when they're, transporting him. So he escapes, and then it's probably 40 chapters of him trying to find out who framed him while he's on the run in all these different, settings in Arizona, all the forests and the rivers and the mountains and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So he's running around there. And to me, I didn't think that was the best place to start with the character. I wanted to establish his backstory as a pararescueman, his skills at Krav Maga, his outdoorsman experience, his partners that he ended up working with in Reverse Pursuit as well. So that was how that all took place. And it took years. It took several years for me to kind of figure this out, get it all laid out to where it made sense to where you see it today.
Did you find book 1, or I guess 2 and 1 in this case, because you had the 2 idea first, but did you find it's getting faster and faster for you to put out books? You have 4 in this Jason Mulder series, right? So
correct.
Is it getting faster to put out books now after 1 was done?
It is, and especially 1, you have to really. I did a ton of research. I read several books on pararescuemen. There was a National Geographic, I guess, mini-series on what pararescuemen did over in Afghanistan, and I watched that twice. There's probably about 8 episodes of it. So I just did a lot of research to really establish who he was as a character, and so then everything did get faster, and book 4 was my fastest of all of them so far.
Awesome. And you have I'm pretty sure I read somewhere you had experience in the Army National Guard. Did that impact this book, like that experience in how you wrote this book, or some of the situations you were able to put him in, because you have that experience of having been in the forest and lived a lot of that?
Maybe a little. I mean, from what I did in the National Guard, what Jason Mulder does as a pararescueman, or like a Grand Canyon, separation. I was a combat engineer, and so we like to say we were grunts with C4. So I did have some good experience. It really taught me about the military, so just the hierarchies and the ranks and some of the language they used with each other was a little bit easier, but in terms of his skills, it was quite different from me. And I was in long time ago. I've already been out for almost 30 years. So I went like halfway through my senior year in high school is when I signed up. Okay. So I went right after high school. I was on basic training, and then I spent 6 years in it. So I did learn a lot, but it really didn't translate to this book. I started calling it an M16, when I started writing, and then I know everything, the terminology's changed and everything. So I had to do a lot of research on making it meaningful, for a reader in 2023 when I launched it.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking some of the minor details too, of like shadows in the forest when you have that experience of, or the amount of fatigue you can feel as a soldier. Like I was in the infantry reserve for a while here, and I try and put that into some of my books, those moments of like pure exhaustion, or the shadows where you think you're seeing things but they aren't there, like when you're in the heat of training and stuff.
I did take advantage. I wanted to use some of my knowledge. So in book 3, the villain is using explosives. So that was one I knew a little bit more about, so I did want to take advantage of that. But yeah, as much as I like to say, some of my skills came through. I will say, just kind of an interesting tidbit is Jason Mulder is a black belt in Krav Maga. And I started to try to write that, watching YouTube videos, and I couldn't do it. So I signed up and took about 8 or 9 months of Krav Maga myself.
Cool.
And got my yellow belt, and I was on my way to my orange. And when you have yellow belts sparring with each other, we don't really know how to do it like the black belts and brown belts do.
Yeah.
And I got a pretty good short-term injury from it. So I decided I was going to hang up the Krav Maga training and
Yeah.
focus on writing a little safer. So, but I loved it. I really learned how it is such a valuable skill to have in terms of self-defense, specifically kind of in a fight like Jason Mulder has
Yeah.
with maybe taking on two members of a cartel, for example. So I did learn that. The moves he has were ones that I learned and then again studied a little further to make sure it came across in the best way for the book.
Did you do Krav Maga before you started writing, so you knew how you were going to write it, or did some moments in the book have to change because you're like, oh, this is not going to go that way. It's going to go this
Had to
way.
change. Yeah, a couple of them I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? I read that and because because that book did take me a couple years to write. And I might even been almost done, but when I started the Krav Maga within a couple of months, I knew that I had to rewrite certain sections of it. And specifically, there's one scene at the end where the villain, Victor Romero, puts a gun like at his chest, and that was something we learned a lot about how to get out of a situation like that. So that was a kind of step by step the training that I picked up.
No, that's very cool. I did jujitsu for a while, and although I haven't put it in any books, it was surprising with some of those martial arts where you're just completely helpless. It doesn't matter how strong you are, and sometimes how small the guy is that you're dealing with. For jujitsu, when they put pressure on you and you're just like stuck there, it was a very humbling experience. I can imagine Krav Maga would be similar in that when you apply some of these skills.
Yeah, I was one of the older people there as well. So that was a yellow belt. I wish I would have started sooner. I actually really enjoyed it, but bumps and bruises at my age and working full time and
Yeah.
doing the family full time and writing full time. Essentially, I just made the decision to make that a short term opportunity and focus on the writing.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, hey, that's great. That's great that you had that experience to pull into the story, and it did come to life with what he was doing in the book, which was good. The Arizona caves, the landscape, the distance. He drove a lot. That was also. Is that all real? Is that all factual, or did you use creative license when it came to that cave escape and the creek and the falls and all these little places that he ends
Yeah.
up going to?
So the fall specifically is very real, and the way I describe it, I'm a researcher. I did it on the Enneagram. That's what I am. I do research. I go in rabbit holes. If I go look up something, I can spend 2 hours looking around. And Cibecue Falls is real. It is on the Fort Apache Reservation. During the time I wrote they were shut down during COVID, so I have not physically been there. So I had to use images, but I have been to Show Low and Payson many times, so I know those areas very well. And so everything's real. The one thing I probably took some license on is it maybe actually longer, and I didn't want Jason spending like 4 hours driving somewhere. Doesn't make for very good thriller content. So some of his drives were probably like someone who was from Arizona. They're like, how can he get there that fast? So I did some things with that, but like I did a lot of research on the national forest, and one thing that is true is like all just the national forest in Arizona could fit to the entire New England of the United States in it.
Wow.
So it's vast, and so that's when I say it'd be hard to find somebody. It really it's a big area, and the ruggedness I tried to describe, and just the change from an elevation, how tall the trees can get, and how rugged the mountains can get is all true.
Cool. Yeah, it was well done. What made you choose to have Jason try many times to have the police deal with the cartel as opposed to going full vigilante? I think you mentioned earlier that you were kind of trying to make it real to life, but I appreciated that because that's what it felt like. It felt real to life in that even with the experience and the training that he's had and what he's seen in combat, a person wouldn't just rush into murder all the cartel. Like he tried. He tried to get the police on his side, and all those things happen.
Yep.
What made you choose to do that instead of having like a John Wick kind of moment where you hurt my dog, now I'm going to murder everyone involved?
No, that was very, very intentional. Like I wanted Jason to be somewhat relatable to an average person. It's if you are an avid outdoorsman and you get a black belt in Krav Maga and you become a PJ in the Air Force, you may be able to do some of what he does. So I wanted to make him more relatable, to the average reader. And Jason has a very strong moral compass. That was something that was important to me. In all 4 books, Jason never murders anybody. He has a pretty high body count by the end of 4 books, but it's all kind of in self-defense or in line with his job, defending others. Usually is what he does. So he's a strong protector, and that's why I wanted that to come out. That he was kind of pushed to do this. Jason just wanted to be left alone. He wanted to be a pararescueman, but the cartel forced his hand, and then because they forced his hand, and then that brought out the skills that he has, and he has a couple of sidekicks that help him, which was something I really was excited to do and something that was intentional. I wanted to not have the lone wolf John Wick. I wanted to have something that was a little more realistic, but still brings the excitement and suspense of a vigilante action thriller.
Yeah. And Shauna and Tarek have 2 of the big character arcs. Did you pre-plan those arcs? Because they seem to have, well, I guess the 2 biggest arcs of the story, those 2.
Yeah. And then his partner in the Air Force, Clay Landry, was the other the one. But yeah, I did plan that. I wanted to have, because I kind of knew what was coming in book 2 and book 3. I had most of my books planned, at least through book 3 when I started, at least the idea for book 3. So I knew what I wanted to have come, and that's where Shauna came in as, eventual wife is supportive, and she also has an arc through all four books. But I wanted to make it seem a little more organic. I just didn't want to throw them together, So in the book, she's a grief counselor and comes to try to help after the tragic loss in Jason's life, and Tarek is actually her cousin, and so you even get to see how Shauna she has some debate. Like, she doesn't like fighting. She doesn't like what Jason does, but she understands. So she ultimately helps him with her cousin, who's like an expert tracker. He's part of the Fort Apache reservation, and he has skills that Jason didn't have. So that's why the collection of Jason, Clay, and Tarek, made a fun group to write, but also they had strengths that the others didn't have that played out throughout the book.
When you're creating characters, how do you go about that? Do you feel like they just come to life as you're writing the book, or are they also pre-planned in like a list of things that need to happen because you've planned this series out?
That's a great question. I call myself a plotzer, so I'm not. I write like I'm a big fan of Kyle Mills, and when he comes to town to launch a book, I go see him, and one thing he always talks about how he writes these like 30,000 word plots or outlines, and that's kind of what I do too. They're getting shorter, but then when I start after about the first 5 or 6 chapters, it all changes.
Yeah. I've done that.
It allows me to put things through my mind, but I spend a lot of time, especially getting on the first book, maybe second book in the series, or whenever I had a main and another new character. I kind of go old school. I read a book when I started years ago on how to create a compelling character, and I create a wound, and I create, and a lot of it doesn't even make the book, but it helps me create the character in my mind so I can keep them consistent and throughout a series, which is what I always hope to write. So I do spend a lot of time, and Jason Mulder, there's so much I have on him. I release some of it to my newsletter fans because I have stuff about his parents and his grandparents. The grandparents I don't think have been mentioned in the book, but I have who he was growing up, and I spend a lot of time looking at what their fears are, what they're driven by, and that helps me make sure that the character does what's consistent throughout the entire book.
And that's pre-planned then?
It is. Yeah, the characters don't change too much. But some of them I don't spend a lot of time on. Like I will say Clay Landry. He's a special cognizance in the Air Force, which is, they used to be, they were actually called like combat weathermen, I think, or something like that. So that MOS changed. But I knew I needed him to have a capable sidekick that was a little more morally gray than Jason. So just to kind of push him sometimes, because Jason is kind of a by the book person, So for him to go do what he did, it took some pushing sometimes. And that's where Clay came along. So I had Clay's character planned, but he evolved to be a little more gray than I originally anticipated. But I think I felt it was good for either the scene or the book. Yeah. So I continued to let those play out. So I would say the main characters were pretty well planned and they stuck to it, but the kind of secondary, a little less planned, and they tend to kind of flow with the scenes and the arc of the book.
And if we go, you should take a step back to the planning with the vigilante thing, the police and their role in the story, was that, like, well, two-part question. One, is that real, the politics of policing in that area, is that real? And then did it impact your story?
It did a little, and I had to be really careful because I'm a huge supporter of law enforcement and the military, and I didn't want to paint the police in a bad light, but there are some corrupt police, specifically some of the politicians, like the sheriffs who are elected. Sometimes they do things to win elections, and that's why I felt it did fit. For those who may be familiar with Arizona, there was a famous sheriff called Joe Arpaio. He called himself the world's toughest sheriff. And he, as a sheriff, he was in the news like every day. So my character is not necessarily based off him, okay. But I just remember seeing like how he would act when he had a camera in his face. Yeah. And so that inspired some of the traits and behind the law enforcement that was on the wrong side of the law.
What about local police and like reserve police? Is that governed the same way, where if you're in this area, this is the force that deals with this, or was that creative licensing?
Yeah, it's a little, because living in Phoenix is a huge metropolis. I would say it's the police there, the more local police, and like the Phoenix police are very large. You know, I would say they're pretty typical of what you'd see in a large U.S. city. But when you do get out in the smaller towns, in the mountains and stuff, you do get a little more. And Arizona has that rugged individualism kind of in our culture, and you get a few characters. You're going to see a lot of cowboy hats and tough talk, from sheriffs, and so that's pretty realistic in the smaller communities. Lots of ranchers, a lot of outdoorsmen, and it's the police govern differently when that's your citizens in your area.
Yeah, small town kind of feel. So we are running a little bit low on time. I have a couple more questions for you. This is going out to authors who are listening to the show, so it's a bit of a specific question for them. What advice would you give to someone who just published their first or second book?
Well, one thing that I learned is I was a little slow on the marketing, which is shameful because my full-time job for many years is I do marketing, consumer marketing. But the first thing I would tell someone is just make sure you write a really good book for your target reader. And this isn't the right to market, type of recommendation, but just make sure it's a really good book. And if you write a good book, they'll want to read that second book. So I do see writing books as part of my marketing plan. But when I added, Facebook to just give myself additional awareness, then that's when the sales started to come in at a level that was a lot more interesting and rewarding based on all the work you do. I know most of us write for the love of writing, like myself, but it's a lot of work, and I also like people to read what I write. So marketing is part of it. So even thinking about that in the beginning helps me as I'm writing the third and fourth book. I had the marketing a little more in mind going into it, and then it just helped the writing process and the process of getting it into readers' hands. So that'd be my advice: write a good book and have a plan for marketing.
When you say marketing, do you mean, you mentioned Facebook, so there'd be like Facebook page. Are you also using like Facebook ads and like paid ads and newsletters and stuff?
Yeah. Email, newsletter, and paid Facebook ads are my two primary ways. I've chased the shiny object, like a lot of new authors. I tried a TikTok page, I tried Instagram, I tried Twitter and or X now, and it just I didn't enjoy it. So then I didn't stick with it. As soon as I went a couple weeks without any traction, I just gave up, and I'm glad I did. I feel like I'm just going to kind of pick my lane. For me, it's going to be email, newsletters, writing. I'm trying to write more often and give the readers more to read, and then the Facebook ads to get them out there. I'll dabble a little bit with Amazon ads, like with a launch, because I think it's a little faster. Most of my books are currently in Kindle Limited. Just a little announcement: I am taking all the Jason Mulder series out of Kindle Unlimited, and probably by November it should all be wide. So I'm going to make it available to a larger audience.
Yeah.
But either way, I would still do the same things. I would use a little Amazon ads in the beginning to get that the quick eyeballs onto the new books, and then do long-term Facebook ads.
Okay. Thank you. That's great. That's great advice. Yeah. And where can listeners find your book?
You can find my website is robertgoluba.com, and there's links to, right now they're all on Amazon, but that's where you can find out if you're interested in my books. I have a couple free prequels for readers to read other stories. One of them is a real military version. It was the first one I wrote, and then I'm like, I probably need to make it more similar to the book, so it's more similar to Cartel Hunter. But yeah, you can find robertgoluba.com is the best place, or just if you look up Cartel Hunter on Amazon, it'll be my book. Will be one of the first you find.
Thank you. I'll link to all that in the show notes. So thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it. If you don't mind sticking around for a couple minutes after the show, we have some bonus questions for our newsletter subscribers that just go out to them. And thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed reading Cartel Hunter, and we'll be getting into the next book. And thank you for your time.
I had a blast, and thanks for giving me this opportunity, Mark.